UTSA is bowl eligible. Whether it's the magic of the dome, the black uniforms, or a bit of both, the Roadrunners just play differently at home. In this episode, we break down the game that literally snapped the triangle of toughness, preview next week's matchup at Army, and check in on UTSA basketball. Let's get started.
This is episode 125 of the Hail Married podcast. I'm the Toves, and as always, I'm joined by my wife, A Toves. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, whether you listen before or after Thanksgiving Day to us. Before we get too festive, though, and start celebrating Thanksgiving a little too early, let's get into breaking down UTSA's big win over ECU, 58-24. It's been a while since we started with football because it's been such a downer. I mean, you had South Florida game happen, and then you have Charlotte, which wasn't that much better, but at least it was a win, and there was just better things to kind of focus on than football.
But yeah, I mean, we're going bowling again because of this big win over ECU.
Yeah, and before we get too happy about, going bowling, I think we just have to be careful about the fact that I don't really want to go down this rabbit hole actually, but getting to 6 or 7 wins every year puts us sort of in this average, mediocre state of the program, and it doesn't really excite casual fans. You start seeing, the season ticket holders begin to start declining, and it just becomes a whole mess for the program because you have just less engagement and just attendance, really. So, I mean, we're seeing already the attendance get hit badly because this team just continues to be sort of on the doldrums, especially on the road, and it just doesn't help home attendance.
Well, I will say I was surprised that there was no graphic at the end of the game that said we were bowl eligible.
On one hand, it makes me feel good that we're not celebrating being just bowl eligible every single season. On the other hand, it's it is an accomplishment. So, I mean, at least they kind of tweeted something out. But yeah, I don't know. I will say though that there's plenty of complaints from East Carolina fans. I mean, some of them are blaming the American Conference refs, which is just tells you how down a fan base is about a loss. Because, I mean, really, the refs didn't cost you that game.
No.
Your ECU team came out and played badly on offense and defense. And, I mean, we could do a whole pod episode on just how bad Caden Hauser was. And we're not even ECU fans. We've watched him all year, and this was the worst game he's played, Toves.
Yeah, I mean, it was just surprising to me after having watched how well the team played against Memphis and to see, other games that they had played well in, to then come into the Alamodome. And I don't know if they were just overconfident that, they could just come in and steamroll us, or if Jeff Traylor's playing mind games with them and they got caught up in the, how do you overcome this undefeated conference record? I don't know. It was just surprising to see how poorly they played against UTSA.
Well, and that ECU offense, as your quarterback goes, so goes that offense. And with Caden Hauser, as we just talked about, not playing very well, it helps that mystique, I think, of the Dome. And, I think UTSA fans really do believe that there's something else at play here.
Look, I mean, we've joked about it before, about this Alamodome magic. There's now people out there, whether it's ECU fans or Tulane fans or whatever, calling for some investigation to find out what happens in the Dome and why UTSA can play so differently. And look, we're all just as confused as they are, but I don't know if there's really magic, or like I said, if ECU just underestimated UTSA like other teams have. But every time I hear, this comment from Jeff Traylor about either resources or practice facilities or things that we need, it just makes me laugh because, one, look, we all know you need more resources. We've said it before, but the team that played against ECU and played against Tulane is the same team that laid an egg against North Texas and, South Florida. So I don't know what it is about being in the Dome that suddenly makes them play so well, but we got to figure out what it is that on the other side makes them play so poorly when they're on the road. I mean, I think rather than, getting Jeff Traylor this indoor practice facility or covered practice facility like he's talked about, we need to figure out how to play outside of the dome and just out in the elements. Like, I think instead we should take the money he would use for an indoor practice facility and rent a different high school stadium every week, and then just make them go out there and play in a stadium that's not theirs, that doesn't feel like home, and just bus in a bunch of kids or pay the kids from the high school to come in and just boo them the whole time. Offense, defense, make them feel like they're playing in a hostile environment. We can bring in wind machines, whatever we need just to get them to be able to figure out how to play without this home crowd and this feeling of whatever it is in the dome that makes them just feel comfortable and relaxed and play free.
Well, to go on top of your idea, maybe they just practice in front of Texas State fans. I mean, if there's anybody that's going to hate on UTSA, it's going to be Texas State fans. So just go to Bobcat Stadium and there you go, or whatever the stadium's called now. But yeah, I mean, I welcome any investigations into UTSA because I'd like to think that maybe they come up with the answers to some of this stuff. Because like you said, I mean, I think from a UTSA fan perspective, we're just as confused. So if an investigation helps to get answers, well, let's do it, right? Like, yeah, I mean, why not?
I want them to be able to replicate whatever it is that they have at home. Like, do they need to travel with their own pillows? Do we need to, I don't know, like have them bring their own food so that they feel like they have their own home cooking? Whatever it is that they do to perform the way they do in the Alamodome, because you can't tell me that we need more talent. We clearly have a talented group of kids. They can play that way in the Alamodome. We just need to figure out how to get them to play the same way on the road.
Well, I don't believe in any magic. I mean, I know there's plenty of UTSA fans that do. I don't believe on it. I just think that, just going with what you've talked about, the way UTSA plays on the road, I think it makes visiting teams overconfident. And I think that they feel like they don't have to play to a certain level. And to me, we saw it, when we played Tulane and when we played East Carolina. Like, it just, you could tell those teams didn't really come in very juiced to play UTSA, and it showed in the scores. I mean, you kick their asses, and this is what happens.
Right.
Like, you have to show up every single week, and it would be the same thing for UTSA if they went onto the road and they were, were undefeated going into a game at Charlotte, and we just kind of let our guard down and Charlotte upset us, right? We would all be upset, but so I get it. It's just one of those situations where I don't think it's got anything to do with magic. It's just teams just aren't taking us seriously, and they shouldn't, because we've been pretty 500 for the last couple seasons, so it's understandable. But one thing that we do have to talk about, though, is the triangle toughness, because
yeah, last week we said it looked like it was hanging by a thread, and we talked about that metaphor for a different reason, but it literally fell apart in this game because Brandon Tucker goes over to celebrate the fumble that he forced that Chapman recovered in the third quarter, and he goes to beat the triangle, and it just snapped. So I don't know what that means for the program and for what that's going to lead into next week, but it just it took a beating for all the right reasons this game, but it couldn't stand up to a couple of forced fumbles and a pick six.
That'll get you every single time. So let's get into the game now, because I think there's plenty of good to talk about with UTSA, and let's start out with the special teams.
Yeah, it was a much, much better night for special teams. Petro was 3 for 3 on his field goals. Cale Hogan had 2 punts that were within the 20-yard line. He had a long of 55. They did not give up a touchdown on a kick return. So I think overall they redeemed themselves from the Charlotte game for sure.
I will say that Cale Hogan must just love playing at the Dome, because he didn't have to kick. He's just
That's
showing up
true.
for the ride, right? Like I'll get a pregame meal out of this. I get to kind of be in the comforts of the dome, and I don't have to worry about elements. But then like we go on the road, and all of a sudden I have to be punting like 8 times a game. So, but good to see the special teams recover after, as you said, there was not the best performance last week against Charlotte. So certainly a bright spot here. Also a bright spot was this offense. We were talking about this ECU defense and some of the havoc that they create. I mean, they only gave up about 120 yards rushing per game leading into this one. And all right, Atos, maybe there's a little something in the air here, but UTSA rushes for 2-0 against this ECU defense.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some magic in some of these numbers, but
True. I mean, there is, and I think that's why some fans maybe are, saying things about the dome magic. But, looking at the conversions, we talked about it in our preview. This ECU defense was really stout on, preventing opponents from converting on 3rd and 4th down. We talked about 3rd down conversions. They only gave up about 30%. Well, UTSA in this game converts 43% of theirs. On 4th down, they only gave up around 40% of 4th down conversions, which ranked 19th. So, you're talking about really good defensive stats here. UTSA only has to do it once, and they convert on 4th down. So it's those situations where you look at it and you say, I mean, what did you expect, ECU fans? I mean, this is UTSA continuing to convert, continuing to extend drives, and they're tiring out your defense. And that's what helps our players put up some nice stats.
yeah, well, and you mentioned earlier, as the quarterback goes, so goes the offense. Well, this again was a stellar performance from Owen McCown. He had 72.7% completion rate, 248 yards, 5 touchdowns, and he rushed for 17 yards. It was only one rush, but it was a really well-timed rush, and it was a surprise for the ECU defense. They were not expecting to see him take off. And the other thing I think we have to talk about with Owen is that he knows how to slide, which is good, given, the
Frank's
fact that
history.
that we would always worry about Frank when he took off running. So,
Well, I mean, it surprised the ECU defense, but it surprised us as well. I mean, we're going, it's back to the Owen of last year that would take off on some runs. Now, again, you said he only rushed it once, but still, maybe that threat had the ECU defenders thinking twice. But even then, it still doesn't make it for the fact that they just didn't play well. But Will Henderson, though, comes in, and you don't have Robert Henry in this game because he's sat out. And because of an ankle injury is what we were told. And so you give Will Henderson his first start of the season, and he only goes for 19 carries for 146 yards, 7.7 average. So, I mean, he's almost getting 8 yards per carry. And to be honest with you, Will Henderson looked like Robert Henry out there. And we talked about it last week. He's looked patient. He's looked really good. And for a guy that's really a runner that's a sprinter, really a fast guy, this makes it really tough for a defense. Because, I mean, he can hit the hole and go, or he can be patient, kind of churn his legs a little bit, and then, take off on you. So, yeah, Will Henderson, what a great night for him.
and then on the receiving side, Owen was without Devin McEwen, but it didn't really seem to matter because he was able to spread it around. We had 5 different receivers that scored touchdowns: Amador, DJ Allen, AJ Wilson, Houston Thomas, and Jaron Randall.
This is the Owen that we're used to, just spreading the ball around to all his receivers. And, I mean, he just got good looks in the passing game. And so when we're thinking about the difference between home and road, it just feels like those looks aren't there on the road. But for some reason in the dome, he's getting a lot of clean looks. Again, it's just the story of this UTSA football team where the offense, as you said, just keeps rolling. And we've now done special teams, the offense, 2 phases of the game that are rolling, and then we get to the defense. Atovs, Caden Hauser, we've already kind of talked about, but he was just off all night. And look, he was missing his number 2 receiver, Yannick Smith, and you previewed him and talked about how he was going to be crucial in this game for ECU. But I got to tell you, Atos, I don't know that Yannick being there changes anything because UTSA just came out and played well. And to be honest with you, Yannick wasn't going to change the fact that Caton Hauser was just inaccurate in the dome.
Well, no. I mean, he had his number one receiver, Anthony Smith, in the game, and that didn't necessarily give him any edge. So, we already talked about the fact that on the flip side, Owen was without his number one receiver. So this really just came down to the fact that I don't know what was going through Caton Hauser's head, if he was just too cocky, he was pressing, whatever, but it wasn't like he was under a lot of pressure. I mean, there were only 2 sacks on the night. So whatever it was, unfortunately for ECU fans and fortunately for UTSA fans, he did not play well.
I agree with you because I felt like he left a lot of throws out there. There were throws that did seem cocky and overconfident where he would try to squeeze the ball in somewhere where it's like, why would you do that?
And he had a couple of wide open looks that he just missed.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing. So when I was looking at it and kind of thinking back to it, I was like, Caton Hauser on the road looks a lot like Owen on the road, missing a lot of those easy throws, kind of trying to squeeze some throws into traffic. And maybe it's just an American Conference thing, not necessarily dome magic, because it looks like we're seeing the same thing from opposing quarterbacks as our quarterback goes on the road. But let's talk a little bit more about this UTSA defense because, look, we talked about the fact that this ECU offense was converting 51% of their third downs, which ranked them about 10th in the nation. ECU for this game goes 2 for 14, which is only 14%. So they're not able to extend drives. And then on fourth down, they did a better job. I mean, they were only converting about 38%. We talked about how low that was in the nation, but we're like, well, I mean, they're converting third downs. They're not going to really worry about fourth down too much. But they went 3 for 4 in this game. And really that 3 for 4, I think, is misleading because the crucial one that they missed on was earlier in the game, and they really needed to extend that drive. And instead, they failed to convert, and UTSA then drives the ball down and scores again. So it was just kind of snowballing, but it was the type of night where, again, all 3 phases are hitting. And, again, we had some really good individual performances.
Yeah, once again, I mean, Shad Banks just had an exceptional night. He led the team with 10 tackles, a forced fumble, and, of course, the pick 6. We've talked a lot about him all season and how, talented he is and how he has really stepped into that role of being, a number 0, which I know sounds weird to say, but, he really has stepped up and been that leader on defense. And again, these stats just kind of shine through and show you the talent and how fortunate we are that we've been able to have him with us for this year. And we also had great performances from Kendrick Blackshire and a number of other players, but Brandon Tucker, mentioned him a little bit earlier. He is the one that forced the fumble that Chapman recovered and then, broke the triangle of toughness. So hopefully there's no metaphor there, but, Brandon Tucker, again, has been a little bit underrated. We've kind of talked about him, off and on throughout the season, but I think he has been a great addition to this team as well, and certainly has been disruptive when he's had the opportunity to be on the field.
These inside linebackers have just really played well. I mean, Tucker, Blackshire, Banks, it's been just a really good trio, and just this defense, I think, performs so much better because those 3 guys are playing well together. So, obviously a lot of good things from the defense, the offense, special teams. There were some injuries that I do want to quickly talk about. And there was like the offensive line. We took some hits there. And then the defense had a couple of injuries. We won't know the extent of the injuries, unfortunately. Some of them did look like maybe it's going to be more than just one game. But for now, as we tie up this portion of, the ECU UTSA game, let's not end on that downer. Let's hope that those guys are back soon. And if so, hopefully they can keep performing the way they are in our upcoming game against Army.
All right, let's move on and talk about the Army preview.
All right.
UTSA opens as a 6.5-point favorite. This will be the 6th time that UTSA plays Army, with Army leading the series at 5-1. Army has never lost to UTSA in the Alamodome, and UTSA hasn't lost a conference game in the Dome since 2019. One of those streaks is going to come to an end on Saturday.
That's true, and you also have Army playing for bowl eligibility as they're 3-4 in American Conference play and 5-5 overall. But Atos, their last game is against Navy, and they haven't beaten Navy in, I don't know, a few years. Even as dominant as they were last season, Navy went and beat them. So it'll be interesting to see if they can overcome the quote unquote Dome magic.
I mean, certainly this is the first time they've played us in the Dome as a conference opponent, but they've never had any issues beating us in the Dome before. It's going to be interesting. One of the things, though, from this last week's game where they lost to Tulsa in the fourth quarter, they had a lot of uncharacteristic mental mistakes that kind of came back to bite them. So it'll be interesting to see if they fall victim to those mental mistakes in the Dome like Tulane and ECU did.
Well, what's worse is that they were playing Tulsa in West Point. So, yeah, I mean, things get a little different on the road. So this Army team definitely isn't as strong as it was last season, and we'll talk about it right now shortly as we'll look at statistics and stuff. But for the most part, I think what you're looking at is just a team rebuilding, really.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about their offense. Cody Worley is the second-year offensive coordinator. He was promoted to offensive coordinator last year. Very similar scheme. Not that there's been a whole lot of changes for Army over the years, but certainly we're going to see the same kind of triple option. It's a little bit different than some of the other triple options that you see from the other service academies and from Rice. They play out of a flex bone, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, I'm sure, when we get to some of the positions. Why don't you share some of the stats for us?
Yeah, I mean, this Army team is averaging about 338.4 yards per game. That's really a drop off of, I want to say it's about like 50 yards for them from last season. It's quite a bit, but in those 50 yards is probably tucked in like maybe, and I'm just going to guesstimate here, but like 5 minutes of time of possession, because that's one of the things that's Army's calling card is, we're just going to ground and pound, and that chews up the clock. They're only scoring about 22.6 points per game. But again, it's not about how much they're scoring or how many yards they're putting up. It's about that time of possession. And what helps the time of possession is their conversions. On third down, they're converting 41.7% of their third downs, which for any other team is going to be pretty good. For Army, it's just like, well, if we can convert on third down, that's great. But fourth down is really where they're going to make their bread and butter with, because that'll help them continue to essentially extend the drives. And they're converting 67.4% of those conversions. So that's what makes them even tougher, because you have to get them behind the sticks. You have to get them to a point where they're going like on a third and long, and that forces them to rethink whether they want to go for it on fourth down, because if it's too long for them, they're going to go ahead and punt. So it's one of those situations where as long as you can stop them early in the downs, then you have better success against this Army offense. And the one time UTSA beat Army was in West Point, and that's exactly what they did on defense, is they put Army behind in terms of the downs. So that really helped them pull off that win there.
All right, let's talk about some of their key players. They're led by their quarterback, Cale Helms. He's a junior out of Tomball, Texas. He became the starter after Dwayne Coleman, who started the season, got injured. He kind of won that job after the injury and has stayed in that role. He has about a 52.5% completion rate for 466 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Of course, this is Army, so those passing stats are never going to sound very impressive. Really, where you need to look at Cale and his success has been on the ground. He has 241 carries for 988 yards. That's a 4.1 average, 15 touchdowns with a 50-yard long rushing.
And he's not quite Bryson Daly of last season, Captain America, as they used to call him. But he's still pretty effective as a runner. And I think as he continues to grow into the quarterback position, I mean, he only really has one more season, then I think you'll see not quite Bryson Daly level, but at the very least, I think he'll be a little stronger on the position next season.
Yeah. Noah Short is another person to keep your eye on. He is a senior wide receiver. Noah Short played last season, was pretty effective against UTSA. He's kind of a jack of all trades, though. And the reason I say that is because you'll see him listed as a wide receiver on the roster. But again, remember, Army plays a little bit different of a style. So they put Noah in the slot position, and in their flex bone, they can at times hand off to the wide receiver. They'll at times pass to the wide receiver. So if you look at his stats, they're a little different than what you would expect from your typical wide receiver in that he has 21 receptions for 273 yards, 13-yard average, and 1 touchdown. He has 77 carries for 425 yards with a 5.5 average. And he's actually the second leading rusher behind Helms.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be the one that's going to break some runs. And I think as he's kind of grown into this position, you're going to expect to see him run the ball a little bit more because Hayden Reed is our senior running back. He's got 74 carries for 335 yards, about a 4.5-yard average, which is what you expect from an Army running back or quarterback, right? And it's going to be 4 to 5 yards of a gain for them. He's got 3 touchdowns, and it's the most touchdowns behind Helms. So that's one thing you need to watch out for. Another guy to watch out for, though, is wide receiver Brady Anderson. He's their leading receiver yardage-wise, as he has 11 catches for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns. The biggest thing about him that I saw is when they played Air Force, late in that game, Helms went back and just uncorked a 48-yard throw, and Anderson came down with it. And, it was one of those situations where you're like, Army shouldn't be able to do this, but that's what always gets you about Army is that you expect them not to be able to do something, and then they just execute it.
Another player I have to call out just because I love his name, God's Power Wawehi. He's a freshman quarterback. He has 5 rushes for 11 yards against Tulsa. So, you will see him from time to time play, even though, Helms is obviously their starting quarterback. I just love his name, and I think he's somebody to keep an eye on for the future. And look, when you've got God's power on your team, I mean, maybe that means you're destined for great things. I don't know.
Fair point. One other thing to note is that this O-line is pretty stout across the board. They're their usual good offensive line. Nothing spectacular out of any of these offensive linemen. They're just play well together. Again, disciplined play, which you would expect from the armed forces, right? So I will say, though, that the right guard position seems to be their kind of a weakest link. So maybe an A or B gap type of blitz from UTSA might be effective because that's just where they've been rotating offensive linemen. So, look for UTSA's defensive left side to potentially have an impact in this game if they can get through that right guard position. All right, let's get into the Army defense now. Nate Woody is our 6th-year defensive coordinator. His defense is allowing 354.1 yards per game. Again, nothing too spectacular here, but because of the fact that you don't have Captain America at quarterback this season, they're allowing more yards per game because that offense doesn't execute at the level that it was against their opponents. So without Bryson Daly, you get some challenges here on defense. They're allowing 22.4 points per game. So you see that they're kind of allowing and scoring about the same amount of points, which means Atov's a lot of close games, which would probably drive you nuts if you were an Army fan. Now, in terms of their conversions, this is where things have slipped for them this season as they've had to replace some players. They're allowing 45% of the third down conversions by their opponent's offenses, and they're allowing 59% on fourth downs. Last season, those numbers are much lower. And you see that I think they're just going through, again, sort of a rebuild here, much like that offense is, and just trying to get younger players in and trying to get them settled. It sounds like it might be a disaster in the Dome, but we know what happens when they get in there. So this defense may just become impenetrable all of a sudden. But, I guess we'll see. Let's
talk about some of their key players. Their senior co-captain is Thomas. He's from Liberty Hill, Texas. UTSA fans will probably remember him from last season because he had a number of tackles and played very well on defense when we were up at West Point. Again, this season, he leads in solo tackles at 50, total tackles at 87, and 5 passes defended. He is definitely someone that is going to be disruptive. And, he's not going to be the kind who does the arm tackling. This is someone who's going to take our players down when he gets a chance.
Very much about wrapping up. Jake Bowsam is their sophomore defensive lineman. He leads the team with 3 sacks, also has 1 pass defended and 1 forced fumble. I think the thing about him is just the fact that, as we have sort of an injured offensive line, it'll be interesting to see if we can keep Bowsam here at bay, because if this Army defensive line can start penetrating our offensive line, it's going to cause a lot of problems for this UTSA offense to get on track.
Yeah, and then on their secondary senior safeties, Gavin Shields and Casey Larkin, both have 2 interceptions apiece. They also have another safety, Steven Nadazi, who also should see a lot of playing time. And again, they have been very solid as a unit.
Yeah, they have. And that's the thing, is that they'll rise at certain moments. So, again, doesn't sound statistically like this fantastic defense, but we've seen them play UTSA tough before.
Yeah, definitely. And then just overall, as a defensive unit, they have 8 players who have forced at least 1 fumble. So again, in terms of, like you said, being disruptive, being a cohesive, tough unit, I think those are a couple of things that you're going to have to keep your eye out on. All right, let's talk about special teams. Sean Saturnino is their 7th year special teams coordinator. The key player really to think about on the special teams for Army is Dawson Jones. He's their sophomore kicker. He's been somewhat inconsistent. Right now, he is 66% for his field goals. He's missed 5 overall, 2 in the 30s and 3 in the 40s, and he only has a long of 45. So I'm not sure that you're going to see him called upon in a long yardage situation, although when playing in the Dome, they may give him the chance to kick a longer field goal than anticipated. But as you know, 4th down situations, more than likely Army's going for it.
Yeah, and I think with the kicker, they're never going to have this perfect kicker. It's always going to seem much like the other positions we talked about, like just a sort of an afterthought, but just watch them always play big at those moments. So, all right, Aid, so this is pretty early in the week, but it is a holiday week, so let's get to those Hail Mary predictions.
Yeah, I've really struggled with my prediction for this game because historically UTSA has been very challenged and struggled against Army, even in the Alamodome. However, like you mentioned, this isn't the Army team that we've seen in the past. They're just not as dominant as in previous years. And we've seen that they were prone to make some uncharacteristic mental mistakes like we saw last week against Tulsa. I'm just so confused by this UTSA team, though, that I don't really know what to expect on Saturday. They could show up and play like they have against ECU and Tulane, or they can play like they have historically against Army. I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I know you don't believe in the magic of the Dome, but give me UTSA 31, Army 24.
Well, the antidote to this mythical Dome magic comes to town this weekend, and it appears that UTSA is in for a rough time. Again, you mentioned that this isn't the same Army team from last season, but it's probably still stronger than some of the other Army teams that we've played before and have lost to before. But this one does, as you mentioned too, battle so many mental mistakes. So we'll have to see which Army shows up in that first quarter. Now, you have to add the fact that this UTSA offense looks like a video game. They're just throwing up points like there's no tomorrow. But once they leave the Dome, it's like they don't even know what a football looks like. I know that I've been picking UTSA to lose all these games at the Domes. I figure somebody is going to come in here and beat UTSA. So they have been undefeated every single time I have picked them to lose. So I'm going to test some things out this weekend just to see this so-called Dome magic. So give me UTSA 38-28 over Army.
Before we go, let's talk about the rest of the American Conference football games. We know that UTSA played spoiler to ECU's opportunity to get into the championship game, but Tulane and North Texas took care of business on Saturday, keeping their conference championship hopes alive. North Texas beat Rice 56-24, although it looked a little bit dicey there in the first half of the game. At one point, Rice had a lead on North Texas, but certainly could not sustain that.
Yeah, Drew Mestamaker remembered that he was the better quarterback, so all of a sudden he just started slinging it around. And Wyatt Young, their wide receiver, just went off for like 293 receiving yards, which I think is a UNT record. So it was just absolutely nuts.
And then Tulane beat Temple 37-13.
Oh, my boy John Summerall rises from the dead, right? Like this entire time we keep thinking that John Summerall and Tulane are just gonna like just fade away. They lose to UTSA and that's it. It's over for them, right? Here they are. They're back in it. They have Charlotte for their last game, and unless something just really goes wrong for Tulane, John Summerall will have Tulane in a conference championship game in every single year that he's been not only the coach at Tulane, but also just a head coach overall. That is an amazing statistic for a coach.
Yeah, like you mentioned, next week Tulane is playing Charlotte. North Texas is playing Temple. You know, that could be a bit of a tough game for them, and it could keep Temple from becoming bowl eligible. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. But Navy has, I think, the toughest road to the championship. They were on a bye this week. They play Memphis next week. So, you know, that could be a challenging game, although Navy beat Memphis last year. So,
well, Navy plays Memphis on Thanksgiving Day. And last year, Memphis upset Tulane on Thanksgiving night. So, you know, you're right. Anything could happen because Memphis is just that weird. But, you know, it would be interesting if all three of these teams win and then we're in some sort of tiebreaker. And honestly, I forgot what the tiebreaker is.
Well, I think North Texas, because they beat Navy, right? They think they
That's
have
right. That's right.
I think they have the tiebreaker. So I think if all of them win, it's Tulane and North Texas, but certainly could be wrong. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about basketball. The men's basketball team hasn't had any games since the last podcast that we did, so there's not really anything additional to share there. So next up for them, they're at the Jacksonville Classic Thanksgiving week. Both of those games can be streamed on Pass the Ball Live. They're playing Abilene Christian and Georgia Southern. And then they'll be back in the combo on November 29th against South Alabama at 1 p.m. Central. The women's basketball team, though, played UIW this past week. And we went to go watch them play at UIW. It was the first time visiting that facility. And let me just say I was less than impressed. I think my words to you were, I will never complain about the Convo again. Because the McDermott facility is just awful. I'm sorry if there are UIW fans or UIW alum listening to this. It was just awful. And I think it was even worse having gone from seeing Tarleton's beautiful $110 million facility to then going to the McDermott Center, which again makes the Convo just look like a palace. It was so chaotic and claustrophobic in that facility that, I mean, I guess you can say it creates this good home environment because it is very, very loud without a lot of people being in it. Because it's kind of like playing in the dome. It's like a little cave where the sound just like resonates. But when you walk into that facility, it feels like you're walking on the court because they don't have like seating right up against the court and then a walkway. You have the walkway like you would in a high school gym. So you feel like you're walking into a high school gym like in the middle of the game and everyone's just kind of like standing around. There's like right at the door. So you're kind of trying to like navigate your way through and push your way through people to get to the point where you can get to your seat. It was just
it's just so cramped. That's what
it was very reminiscent of being in a high school game.
Yeah.
And I know people say that about the Convo all the time, but if anyone criticizes the Convo for being a high school gym, just Google and show them pictures of McDermott And yeah, no, the convo is so much better.
Yeah, and probably one of the most interesting environments, as you have already talked about, but also pretty cool for college basketball environment. UTSA beats UIW in the hometown showdown, 74-57. It was at times back and forth, but I will say that you mentioned UIW being chaotic, and UIW's new coach Jasmine Player, who actually played under Karen Aston at Baylor at the time, and was actually coached by Kim Mulkey, wants this type of like kind of chaotic game. She wants to play up tempo. She wants to shoot a bunch of threes. And I'm sure at some point when she gets those players to play in her system, it's going to be much better. But right now, it's not quite that. And, we had these two UIW fans that were right next to us, and they were completely watching a different game because they thought UTSA was fouling or doing something every single time. And it was like, that's a clean block. That's a clean steal. That's, your player is way out of control. And that's really what it came down to is UIW's form of offense is chaotic, and they just shoot a bunch of threes. I mean, it was just really chucking a bunch of threes and not really moving UTSA's defense. They kind of got some better movement by middle to the end of the first quarter, but it was still kind of rough. And, because they were hitting some threes, that kept them in the game. But where this game was decided, and why I wanted to talk about, is because in the second quarter, that's when UTSA outscores UIW 20-9 and outshoots UIW 58% to 25%. UIW was 0 for 7 from three-point land and was 4 of 16 overall in the second quarter. They end up shooting 38% for the game and 23% from three-point land, but them going just completely dead from three-point land that second quarter, that just absolutely killed them because they were pretty much in the game. If you looked at the other three quarters, Atos, it was an interesting game just overall.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that really sticks out from that, particularly the first half, but mainly the first quarter, was I don't know what was going on with the court, but it seemed like it was really slippery.
Yeah.
So there were literally just like bodies flying. Like it didn't matter which team it was, when they would go to challenge for a rebound, like someone would slip, and then the next thing you know, there was a pile of girls on the ground, which just kind of added to that feeling of, okay, everyone's just sort of out of control and I'm not really sure what's going on here. You add that in with the crowd noise. That first quarter, I think, was challenging for UTSA. And then, like you said, once they got into their rhythm, they were able to really dominate and shut down UIW. The second half of the game was much better because the fans also realized that the game was getting out of reach. So by halftime, there was a good portion that were gone. And then by the end of the third quarter, most of the people had left. So, it was a much better environment at that point for UTSA.
Yeah, it was quieter, but I will say, I'll call out some players here. Guard Ariana Hardaway, I thought was clutch during this game. There was some moments where, as you talked about, like the young runners just seemed to get unnerved, but she was so steady in her play, and it was just simple plays, like either just doing a pick and roll or doing more of a give and go with one of the bigs and just executing. And she did it over and over. And that, I think, is what this UTSA team needed, especially in a hostile environment, is really what we should be calling it. Because, yeah, with it getting so loud, she steadied the team at the times when they really needed to just calm down a little bit and just execute their offense or execute on defense. Another player to call out here is freshman guard Adriana Robles, or AR. And Ariana's actually E, so you might start hearing us call them by those nicknames. But AR, just to me, just keeps getting better. She's just a good ball handler. And I think because she's been playing at some different levels of basketball before she got to UTSA, and she's only a freshman, but she's played on the international level with Puerto Rico. And because of it, you can see that she doesn't get as phased as some of the other players, especially here at UIW. When things got loud, you probably see worse gyms internationally when you're playing with Puerto Rico. But here, she did not seem phased. And even though she only played, I think about 23 minutes or so, it was still 23 key minutes for UTSA because it's giving her some more experience and more opportunities to learn. And I'm not going to list any of her stats, even though she was big, but I will say this. I think we're in good hands as long as we keep AR. And I think if she rubs off any of the veteran steadiness from Ariana Hardaway /E, I think we're going to be a really good spot this season. The other player that I really want to call out is Cheyenne Rowe. We talked about in the last game that, she tied with Mia Hammonds with 16 points. She had 17 points in this game, and she led our Roadrunners in scoring, but she just kept getting shot after shot, and she kept hitting big shot after big shot. And there were times when, this UTSA team kind of goes dry, and because of it, things kind of just start to snowball for their opponents, right? And their opponents get a little bit more energy. They score a couple points. UTSA can't really get the offense going. Cheyenne hits a big shot and everything's okay. So I think right now Cheyenne Rowe is our offensive threat because she just has shown up for a lot of these games and has been the scorer in them. So good to see, especially for this veteran that we've been watching for a few seasons now.
All right, so next up for the women, they're playing at the Hoop Fest Basketball Challenge in Frisco this week. Monday, they play against Auburn at 4, and Wednesday against Grand Canyon University at 4. Both of those games are available to stream through Flow Sports online. We have to take a minute here to talk about my Tarleton Texans. This weekend, they finished off the regular season with a win over Austin Peay, and they became the co-conference champions alongside Abilene Christian. But the most important is that they made it to the FCS playoffs for the second year in a row, this time as a number 4 seed, which means they get a first-round bye in the playoffs. So they will await the winner of North Dakota and Tennessee Tech, and they will play at home on December 5th. So very excited for this team. They're a very senior-laden team. They have about 40 seniors, I think, that they celebrated on Senior Day. But for Tarleton, again, to reach the FCS playoffs for the second time in a row in the second year that they're eligible to be in the playoffs is just really incredible for that squad.
40 seniors is just so rare now, right? Like
Yeah.
The fact that they've had this type of team for this long and they've been able to keep these guys, just good for them. But yeah, they should have, I think, a nice run. I think there's some, analysts picking them to get, maybe to the semifinals. So that would be really exciting, I think, for that Tarleton fan base and most importantly for the school, because it would get that program just that much more spotlight and a little bit more attention. So Stephenville, I think, is going to be shining bright here pretty soon.
Yep. Well, we will be in attendance for that playoff game. So looking forward to that in 2 weeks. All right. I think that about wraps it up for us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon to recap our game against Army.
Birds up.